My name is Lani St. I use she, her pronouns here and everywhere. And I am your outreach coordinator for the Office of Waste Reduction and Recycling, which is why I really wanted to talk more closely about SDG 12. That is number 12 out of 17, and it is about sustainable consumption and production. I also wanted to be able, sorry, my computer is covering up some controls here. Boop, boop, boop. Here's kind of the theme, the outline for today's presentation. But because it is more of an awareness week, and because the SDG goals, even number 12, just focusing on one, it can be very complex. I wanted to provide you with an awareness of different frameworks about understanding it, and the frameworks that can be used to see our progression in achieving it. And that's why I kind of asked you about the Social Progress Index, Planetary Boundaries, and Project Drawdown. So I'm going to kind of give you a brief overview of those frameworks as well, because they fit really nicely into better understanding the SDGs overall, and even specifically SDG 12. It is a lot. If you want me to stop or you have a question, please unmute yourself. I am trying to pay attention to the chat, but yeah, that's kind of hard, as all of you know, when you've got all these screens going on. But first, since most of you are aware of the SDGs, I'll just really briefly, as you know, they are a commitment to tackling some of the most pressing global challenges of our time. And for this reason, I love them. There are 17 of them. They're supported by 169 specific targets, several targets underneath each goal, but they cover all nations. And I think it's just so impressive because it's actually one of the first time, as the UN likes to say, in human history that all of the nations of the world have come to an agreement and on a comprehensive vision. And they have created these goals and targets for the development of civilization across the planet. And I just love that very aspirational type of approach. I think it's necessary, and I think it's beautiful. I also love that throughout the UN and their multitude of reports, but a key part of it is this discussion of transforming our world. And basically that boils down to these three descriptors. That first, it requires everybody. These goals apply to every person, every sector, our cities, businesses, schools, organizations. Everyone is challenged to act to achieve the sustainability development goals. The second part deals with integration, and that's that all of these goals are interconnected. They are somewhat siloed in their approach, according to other frameworks. However, we cannot achieve just one on its own. We have to achieve them all. And in fact, when we focus on one, we are actually focusing on them all, because there is this interconnection relationship between them all. So even though I may be talking about sustainable consumption and production, that has a huge effect on other goals, right? Whether it's cities and water and poverty and gender equality. So they really are integrated across the board. And last, again, is this terminology that they use of transformative. Because in order to achieve these goals, and we'll go into this more, it really will require each of us and all of us to make big, fundamental changes to how we are living on Earth. So yeah, some big things having to do with these. Now, getting down into the specifics, we see this SDG, responsible consumption and production, and that has to deal with how we view economic growth in our society. And currently, we do couple that. Well, I should say currently, it is coupled if we are growing our GDPs, kind of that side effect is this degradation of the environment, right? And right now we need to decouple that. And that's one of the big key points throughout the SDG 12 is that it is possible to have economic growth and to care for people and also care for planet. Those things can all go hand in hand. And it doesn't, just because in operations in the past, that's not what's been seen, it is possible. And so part of this is that one of the greatest global challenges that we have is to integrate environmental sustainability into all of our plans and policies, legislation, and into the strategies that we have at all levels for economic growth. And in doing so, we can create a greener and a more inclusive society. So yeah, I hope the birds aren't too distracting. This is a picture of a landfill. It's not South Wake County landfill, but it looks pretty similar to that. Even South Wake County landfill does have lake gulls. And it is big. And as you know, like this type of goal in itself, sustainable consumption and production, we need it. I'm not going to inundate you with all of the facts. I think most of us are very aware of the climate crisis that we're facing. We're very aware of 1.3 billion tons worth of food that ends up rotting in retail shops. We're very aware of the 1 billion plus people across our planet who are hungry, and an additional 1 billion plus people who are undernourished. There have to be big changes in order to solve these crises. And so when we begin talking about SDG 12, it really is about how to build a sustainable and resilient society. And so SDG 12 is basically about these 4 things. You want to focus on resource efficiency. You want to stop any type of environmental degradation, right? You want to protect human health and the environment. And you want to promote environmentally sound management of hazardous or other waste and disposable. And we can see this. So now we're breaking it down. The SDG framework doesn't clearly stipulate exactly how to do that when working like with existing technologies and practices, but it kind of gives you this broad basis of goals. So for example, these are all the targets for SDG 12. There is a 10-year framework of programs. Oh, and by the way, I am going to have, like, if I reference any type of document or a lot of these documents and resources, I will share them following this. I'll send them to you through a Google Drive. So for example, Target 1, talks about implementing a 10-year framework of programs, right? And so I'll include that document so you can review it if you want to nerd out like me on this kind of stuff. But overall, it's just talking about and giving a date, like by 2030, we want to efficiently manage our natural resources. Yes, of course. We want to stop food waste. Yes, of course. We want to manage our resources through prevention and reduction and recycling and reuse. Yes, of course. So we can see that these are, these are very aspirational again, but there's actually no clear directives through this goal. Rather, these goals leave it up to countries to identify and adopt the actions that how they are going to achieve the targets, right? According to their own national objectives. And then along with the political and economic realities, that does take a toll on whether or not we can achieve these. And let me skip forward to the remaining global targets. Now, so again, all of these are very aspirational, like, yes, let's promote scientific and technological research, let's implement tools and for sustainable tourism, except for the very last one. And the very last target, 12.8C, I think it's really fascinating that it feels kind of like they snuck this one in here. And I'm not sure how many of you follow like fossil fuel subsidies and We even have a student organization on campus that deals with this, the Climate Reality group. But the UN does state that part of this goal, for SDG 12 is that we need to restructure our taxation system and we need to phase out harmful subsidies because the fossil fuel industry is one of the reasons why we are facing a climate crisis. So that is really fascinating to me. But how are we doing this? How is the world doing, and how in the world are we going to do it? Well, overall, of the 68% of all of the environment-related SDGs, so not just like SDG 12, but when we kind of combine them, there isn't enough data to know. The UN doesn't have the data. And of the data that we do have, we are not on track to meeting them. If we look specifically at SDG 12, the UN says that only 42% of the 914 countries that's part of it have some type of data. But even then, the data that we have, there is a significant time lag. So we do have some serious data gaps in this process. And it makes it really hard to compare year to year, to compare country to country, even to compare within our own countries about what is happening. More in addition, right, it's hard for us to create that type of motivation for countries to do better, do more, because we don't have the data to support that. So therefore that translates into like a lack of investment towards achieving the SDGs, right? The UN, with the data that we do have in terms of a global scale, the UN does let us know this. If we're looking from 2010 to 2017, our global material footprint is increasing faster than the population growth. Basically, we are using way more resources than we should be for our population and even our economic growth. They are not moving at the same pace. In fact, they have said that by 2050, if we continue on the same pattern of growth, we would actually need 3 planets worth of natural resources to try and keep us at that same trajectory. Fossil fuel subsidies have continued to rise, and they're continuing to contribute to the climate crisis. Even electronic waste, when you begin to pinpoint directly into things, it's grown by 38%, but less than 20% of it is recycled. And of course, we can see that the food waste, we still lose millions and millions of pounds and of course dollars worth of food waste in the process, that food system, not only within the fields, but transportation, storage, processing, and even in stores and in our own homes. So it doesn't feel great, to be honest. That's from the data that the UN has. However, what's really cool is you can look up scorecards for every country. This is the latest Sdg Scorecard by the UN Environmental Program for 2021. And as you can see, this is based on the SDG 12, and it kind of looks at how the US is doing. This table, it's going to show you the baseline the baseline and today, as far as the dates that we have, right? If you see a blue arrow going up, it represents a change in the condition based on the indicator in a positive direction. It doesn't mean that the SDG has been achieved. It just means we are moving in the right direction. If you see that yellow side arrow, and you see it at the bottom, 12B.1, implementation of standard accounting tools to monitor the economic and environmental aspects of tourism sustainability. That represents there's little negative or positive change. So basically we're staying the same. An orange arrow represents that we have actually gone in a negative direction, which we see for 12.4.1. That has to do with our agreements in terms of hazardous waste and other chemicals. I think some of that we'll see it's international and multilateral environmental agreements, but with our own administration change here in the US, I think that we'll see that change as the US has already gone back into different agreements, right? So we'll probably see that turning around soon. But majority of what you're seeing, right, are these gray bars. The solid gray bars means we have no data. If it's a sliced gray bar, that means there's some data, but not a lot, right, for them to make a determination. So as you can see, we still lack the data needed to figure out how we're doing. And that's why I just wanted to make you aware of the other frameworks. And one of them is the Social Progress Index. And the Social Progress Index, it's just a new way to look at the success of our societies, right? SDGs is one way to see how we're doing for our whole civilization. Well, SPI does the same thing. It's also data-driven, which I think is really cool. And let me skip forward. It measures, though, it's a little bit different because it doesn't really look at economic growth. It doesn't pull that in. It's more about how successful we are at meeting the basic human needs, right? So it asks these big questions like, can people drink the water and keep themselves clean without getting sick? Can we do that? Do people live long and healthy lives? Do people have access to the world's most advanced knowledge, right? And the SPI then takes these groups and it does feed into has the SDGs feed into their own framework. So unlike the SDGs, which is kind of siloed, like, okay, we're only going to look at number 12, even though number 12 affects everything, SPI then takes them and feeds them into their categories. So you can see here that number 12, when they're using that data, they're really looking at the data according to water and sanitation, water and waste. They're also looking at our overall environmental qualities, okay? So that gives not only nations a great snapshot of what's going on in their communities, but it's also being used by states, i.e. California, and cities around the world to provide their own legislators and policymakers a way to track and report progress in SDGs, but in just a different framework because it's pulling data not only from the UN, but also from, well, it's called the Voluntary National Review System. So they're also pulling from other data points, okay? So it's really cool, really cool. So highly recommend that you take a look at that. Just to give you an idea against how we're doing with the SDGs, the SPI kind of gives us this, these graphs, I should say. So 0 is like, no, there's 0. We're not achieving anything. And if we get to 100, that means the minimums have been met to achieving the SDGs. Again, the minimums. So on average, right, the world in 2015, when the SDGs were implemented, we were at like 69.07, which sounds pretty cool. In 2018, we made some progress. Not a lot, but there was progress. But unfortunately, based on current trends, they note that we're not going to meet that 2030 deadline for the SDGs, which honestly, when you look at all of the targets, yeah, totally agree with that. If you wanted to break that down more by country, it does do that. However, I don't have the SDG 12 only information. They just do it overall by country. So this kind of gives you where we were as of 2018. This is a list of the G7 countries plus Denmark. They added Denmark because Denmark actually leads the entire planet in terms of where they're at in the SDG accomplishment. And then what the forecast is for 2030. If you notice these little asterisks, next to France as well as the US. That asterisk denotes that we have actually slipped some. We have gone backwards. And I would also like to note that this forecast was done prior to 2020. So yeah, we'll see what these look like in the upcoming year. So I'm excited to see when they release new information to see what the forecasts are. The SPI does, though, also kind of do a scorecard, which I think is really cool. Overall, when we're looking at countries, the US does rank 26th on the 2019 Global Social Progress Index. So we did fall 7 places during that time period. And a lot of that decline has to do with, so the orange circles, by the way, means that we are underperforming. So that solid orange means, yeah, we're really underperforming. So a lot of that slippage had to do with personal safety and health and wellness. Overall, we, as a country, we are underperforming. The blue circles, you can see that in access to advanced education. That means we are overperforming, which, yeah, of course we are, right? NC State University. And then the yellow means we're kind of acting, yeah, we're doing just what people would think that we're doing, right? So that kind of is the scorecard, and this was done in 2019. I think it's really interesting. Anyway, can't go, I know, it's a lot of information. I'm making you aware that this is out here. But there is another framework, right, to better understanding how we're doing, but how we're going to get there. And this one is called Planetary Boundaries. Again, fascinating. Unlike the SPIs, Planetary Boundaries is done by climate scientists, right? Environmental scientists. And they are looking at defining environmental limits within which humanity can safely operate. So basically, the Planetary Boundaries concept, it was established in 2009 out of Stockholm in a center called the Stockholm Resilience Center, right? Pretty cool. And they look at environmental systems as a whole. And their goal is to help legislators understand, like, the decisions that they're making. How does that impact the environment? The planetary boundaries cover a lot of things, and they look at like ocean acidification, biochemical flows, fresh water usage, aerosols in our atmosphere. Okay, so they're looking at our whole climate system and environmental system in order to help legislation. And here's when they apply this to the SDGs, which they have done, they have come up with these 4 scenarios, right? Now, to know, they do not really, it's really based on economic growth, okay, this framework. So what they've done is they have modeled, if we were to act like all of the countries, if we were to act business as usual, meaning we see an average like 2 to 3% GDP growth, we just, with the programs and policies that we have in place within our countries, we are acting as is. They look at, can we accomplish the SDGs? And they're actually not looking at 2030 as that end goal, but they have pushed that out to 2050, okay? Then they look at the next model. Okay, well, let's say we are able to increase our economic output by 3 to 4% GDP growth per year, but we're keeping those same policies that we have in place, right, in our own countries, having to do with the SDGs. Cut food waste, for example, or recycle more, whatever they may be. We're doing the same. Okay, well, then they modeled a third one. What if we work harder and stronger in all of these efforts? So we're not doing as is. We're growing basically the same within our GDP. However, we're taking that money of growth and we're funneling it into 30% more into each of these legislations. right? What happens if we spend 30% more in our efforts to have clean energy, 30% more in our efforts to ensure that there isn't hunger, so into our Feeding America programs, into ensuring that we have clean water? What will happen? Okay, and in the smarter ones, I'm going to go over next, but basically, they said none of those will work. They have a fascinating YouTube on this where he goes over the modeling for his data. This is Johan Rockström. He's one of the lead scientists for the Planetary Boundaries framework. And yeah, they don't work. We can meet some of the SDGs, but not all by 2050. If we grow our GDPs a little bit more, if we invest a little bit more, it'll help a little bit, but they don't work. We don't achieve them, and never at using any of those. Let me go backwards. Whether we operate at the business as usual, whether we work faster or harder, if we do those things, we still are facing a climate crisis. Okay. The only one where they've modeled to show success is if we actually create a disruptive and transformative system. And here are his 5 points about transformation, and they are radical, and that's what he says. But they have modeled these in order to say, if you want to achieve the SDGs by 2050, this is what it's going to take, right? You're going to have half emissions every decade starting now. You are going to have to invest in and focus on these sustainable food chains, which, as we know, yes, this is super important to avoid food waste and also feed the hungry. We need to use new development models, especially for poorer countries, and really look at what works and what doesn't, i.e., so China has been able to grow super huge at the cost of the environment until now. And we see that they are changing that now, especially when you begin talking about programs such as the National Sword Program and looking at recycling within China, which obviously has global impacts. That's another presentation. I think one of these huge ideas, again, is he talks about inequality, active inequality reduction, i.e. redistribution of wealth. So they have said that you need to take the top 10% people, the richest people in the planet, and make it so they can't earn more than 40% of their current income. And then you take all of that excess wealth and you give it to the poor. So these climate scientists, again, these climate scientists have said nothing will work as is. We really do have to go outside of the box and begin thinking about truly disruptive, transformative ideas in order to see change. So I'm just making you aware of this. It's super fascinating. I do have all the reports, which I will share with you as well. Okay, something not as perhaps radical, but still really amazing I wanted to introduce to you is Project Drawdown. Project Drawdown is a compilation of a list of the most substantive solutions to global warming, encompassing only viable and existing solutions. So it's nothing new. A lot of Project Drawdown solutions are based on composting, right? Solar energy, wind turbines, things that are already existing. But what Project Drawdown does is they have calculated the carbon impact and modeled them through also the year 2050. And they've also looked at the net cost to society and the total lifetime savings. And then they've ranked them according to cost effectiveness, how quickly they can be implemented or how quickly they can be expanded, how beneficial they are to society, either by the total amount of greenhouse gases that have been avoided or removed from the atmosphere. Super fascinating, again. And drawdown solutions are basically like these top 3 things. You need to reduce the sources of greenhouse gases, right? So we need to bring our emissions down to 0. We need to support sinks. And for those of you not in the kind of this climate world, a sink is basically the ability to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, right? FYI, NC State has a sink and it is our compost facility. pretty cool stuff. And we need to improve society overall. So we need to foster equality. So to reach drawdown, you have to work on all of these things. And much like the SDG goals and other goals, it really is an interconnection between all of it, right? To see action, you have to pursue all of the solutions. And here's just a glimpse. And when I talked about these things exist, meaning these things exist. And it's really fascinating. Again, I highly recommend that you check out Project Drawdown. You can just Google it. And you can look at the rankings, and when they talk about like, how do we reduce global greenhouse gas emissions, some of it, it's not sexy, but it's true. And we see that even here on our own campus. And a lot of that is like refrigerant management, #1 solution, right? Looking at our HVAC systems and making sure that they're operating efficiently. And also looking at how we dispose of them in within the confines of regulatory, anyway, laws and stuff. But what's also fascinating is Project Drawdown has, you're looking at the costs, the savings of operating all of these things across multiple sectors. But they address obviously waste, SDG 12, but they're putting it into different categories. So for Drawdown sakes, they kind of bulk them by industry, and ours, SDG 12, would fit underneath this industry, actually the industry sector. And that has to do with improving materials, how we use waste, addressing refrigerants, looking at landfill methane capture, using digesters, waste to energy. So they're looking at all of this stuff, but they also highly recommend that these on their own, you can't just look at one alone. Like you can't just say our households need to recycle more, because guess what, folks? Your outreach coordinator from NC State Waste Reduction and Recycling is telling you recycling isn't the answer. We know this. You have to focus on all of it across the spectrum. And you also have to focus on big ideas. Here's a kind of a quote, which I think is really beautiful, where they talk about, again, implementing solutions to stop global warming turns out to have multiple co-benefits that help alleviate poverty, improve human and planetary health, eliminate hunger, reduce inequalities, promote gender equality, etc. And so when you look at Project Drawdown, also look at what they have calculated for the greenhouse gas emissions when you're looking at the education of women, because that's also a solution. How do we educate girls and women around the world? And also when you look at the ability of reproductive rights, that's also a solution. And they talk about that. So these really big encompassing ideas, which is necessary, right? Because we are facing a big and encompassing global challenge. But what does the actual UN say when they say, okay, we know that we have these 17 goals, and here is SDG 12 about we want to promote waste reduction and recycling. But how do you specifically do that? It doesn't actually say it within the SDG 12 system, but the UN did release some helpful tips. Here's an example that the UN released to help individuals. It's part of their Good Life Goals, which is super cute. And they want to encourage individuals, businesses, and schools to use these live better actions. So when they talk specifically about SDG 12, it's about reusing, repairing, and recycling, sharing, and borrowing. It's about wasting less, right? It's about demanding. I like that word demand. I generally use the term request, but demand is amazing, that businesses respect people and planet, okay? Yeah, so they don't feel per se very transformative and disruptive per se. This is also the Act Now guide the UN also released with these tips for individuals. And again, these don't feel very disruptive or transformative. And on their own, if everyone in the world decided to use a reusable coffee mug, we would not change the climate crisis. We would not eradicate poverty, right? And so it doesn't feel like doing things on their own may perhaps make a difference. But I have to tell you, they actually do, because guess what? These are still disruptive concepts. For those of you who have ever lived in a place with droughts, taking a 5-minute shower, that's very disruptive. That I have lived in communities where, yeah, you got 5 minutes, you got a token, that's it, and it shuts off. It can be disruptive. Even here in our state of North Carolina, we have had rules to try and enforce people to bring their own bag, i.e. created plastic bag bans, and those have been overturned. That's it's very disruptive. So taken at face value, perhaps it may not feel like, gosh, you know, the UN is asking me to buy local, but it is. Not all businesses, not all education systems, the UNC school system does, have, you know, policies in place for us to talk about, you know, sustainable purchasing and trying to buy local and looking at the footprint and including local food in our dining halls, right? These are very small and easy to do concepts, but when you begin talking about moving it from an individual to a community workplace situation, that's where we're seeing like real change, but that's where we're seeing the need for us to kind of get really uncomfortable, especially depending on where you live. And you know, and so that's why I think in conclusion, for all of this, I want to note these 3 things. Number 1, it's going to take all of us, right? At every level, we have to think about how we will reduce our own waste, how we will purchase things, how we will interact and dispose of our waste in our individual lives, but move that upward. What does that look like for our family? What does that look like where we work or in our school or college or department, right? What does that look like in our community? And what are we doing to create the policies that try to create these transformative changes, even at this very basic level when we're talking about a plastic bag ban, okay? So it requires us to get uncomfortable. I agree that in order for us to achieve the SDG 12s, especially SDG 12, sorry, you get what I'm saying. In order for us to achieve this, we have to get uncomfortable in our own lives. We have to do stuff that's not easy. And we have to encourage those around us to do it too, right? And that can make it uncomfortable to have these conversations with our loved ones. I myself, I'm constantly telling my kids, you put the banana peel in the trash, put it in the compost. I make things a little uncomfortable when we don't do certain things. But we have to look at that. What does that look like within our own lives and the people that we interact with, right? But third, even though it can be really depressing, especially when we're looking specifically at all of it, there are solutions. They exist. We can enact changes that exist now to make a difference at all levels: individual, family, workplace, education, community, state, national, federal, right? They're possible, but they must be intersectional. And by that, I mean, as Audre Lorde once said, there's no such thing as single issue struggles because we do not live single issue lives. All of us have a different way of getting there, but it will take us to look through the lens of other people's. And that's why when we talk about the environment, when we talk about responsible waste, both consumption and how we regulate it and how we divert it, compost it, recycle it, all of these things, know that that's not going to solve anything unless we also combine that, as the UN has done, and as well as how these other frameworks have done, issues of social justice. Okay, you have to identify that they are related. We cannot solve the climate crisis if we do not address and work on our problems with white supremacy. They are completely related. Okay, again, it's going to take all of us. It might be very uncomfortable, but it is possible. Okay. If you have more questions about this, reach out to me. I'm always available by email. You can also connect with us on social media. I'm going to share all the slides as well as resources in a drive. I've already downloaded all of this information for you, so that don't worry about like, oh my God, I'm going to have to. So I'll share that all of that with you. But yeah, SDG 12, can we achieve it? Yeah, it's going to take a lot of work though. That's your answer. So when people ask you. Now I'm opening this up. Do any of you have any questions? I know it's a lot. Again, I'm just trying to spread awareness here.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you. I had never heard of a lot of those different indexes and things. And so that's, I mean, I'm learning a lot about the SDGs as I'm trying to do this work, kind of like, you know, learning about the plane and building the plane as I'm flying the plane. But I just had a question, how, and maybe you want to, you know, hit the stop recording button to talk. You don't have to, but how is NC State doing? You know, in relation to this, like I'm sure there's things we're doing well, and then I'm sure there's things we aren't doing well. So I'm just kind of curious of your frank opinion.
Yeah, well, actually, we're doing great for where we're at. In terms of waste reduction and recycling, we do have a goal of 70% of waste diversion. And so that is really one of those metrics that we currently use. It's really the only metric in terms of SDG 12. Well, that's not true. You can also look at energy management systems, but our goal is to divert 70% of all of the waste generated on campus away from the landfill through either a change in policies like waste reduction policies, reuse, recycling, compost. And we are currently at 54.3%. However, we have identified how to get there. Like, we know how to get there. And we've done that through a lot of data analysis and waste audits. In a normal year, I'd be like, coming out to the waste audit we're holding this month, but that's not going to happen, where we look at our trash for campus. And so we know the majority of what we are throwing away, doesn't go away, into our landfill is compostable materials. In fact, almost 40% of what we're tossing is compostable materials. And so we need to make composting infrastructure available everywhere, which it's not. It's growing. Like, we just put it in the College of Natural Resources over the winter break. But that in itself takes, as you know, for all of my staff people here, time, budget. But we know how to get there to reach that waste reduction goal in terms of how we manage our waste and are we doing it. In terms of energy, I think we're one of the leaders within the Southeast per se. Like, we do a fantastic job, and energy management continues to monitor that with our cogen plants. You know, we're continuing to look at alternative sources and try to bring them on, working a lot with technology and innovation. We're doing great. Now, I think it's important to note that, as always with everything, you know, and even the SDGs themselves, they're saying you can't do one without looking at them all. And so we have a long way to go, especially when we look at food insecurity on our campus. That's still a big thing, right? When we look at racial disparities, not only in hiring practices, retention of staff, faculty, and students, we have a long ways to go. Are we doing better than in years past? Absolutely. But we have a ways to go. And so it's just continuing on for all of us to understand that we may be leading in our area, around certain individual goals. In the Southeast, I will put that preface in the South, or even you can include some of these Northeast schools, but we have a long ways to go overall, because even if we hit our waste reduction goals, if we still have, you know, students who don't feel safe, then we have a problem. So, yeah. Okay. I really am open. You can ask me really simple questions, in-depth questions. Oh, thank you, Julia. Appreciate it too. Okay, well, I am going to be sending out all of this information, the recording once it downloads from the Zoom, as well as the files and resources and these slides for you. But feel free to reach out to me. I am always a resource, no matter what it is. I'm super excited about the SDGs, and I encourage all of you to continue on, because a lot of this, even though this is kind of building awareness presentation, a lot of the remaining stuff, it's fun stuff, which I think is also necessary to making sure that we achieve these things. Okay, have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.